Well, welcome to our Bible study. It's good to be here with you to learn a little bit about Jesus. You know, we're Christians. We should know more and more about Jesus because he is the focus of everything. Well, today we're going to learn about Jesus saying, beware of leaven. And leaven is really just yeast. He's going to talk about beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Don't let a little bit of what the Pharisees are doing wrong get into you because it'll spread all through you. And also, Jesus is going to heal a blind man in a unique way. Well, first, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever gone on a trip and forgotten to take something important? Say, oh, yeah, sure, I forgot my shaving cream one time. I forgot my toothbrush one time. I forgot a comb another time. Yeah, you know, just this recently, I was at the nursing home, and I forgot to take my shirt I was going to wear, and I had to wear a t-shirt. I had to wear the fanciest t-shirt that I could find, but I did have to wear a t-shirt because I had forgotten to take the shirt I was going to wear. I think we've all done that. Today, the disciples have forgotten to take something important, and we're going to learn about that. Have you ever made bread with yeast? Yeah, sure. You know, you mix up the dough and then you take a little bit of yeast in a jar and you put it in, and that yeast permeates the loaf and it makes it rise. Or maybe you had starter and you added some more dough to the starter and mixed that up, and then the yeast that was in the starter permeates into all that dough. And that's what he's going to use an analogy today that says evil things can start off like yeast and permeate into your whole body. Let me ask you this question. What's going to happen to a loaf of bread that has a spot of mold on it? Say, well, that's simple. That mold is going to grow and grow and grow and grow. It's going to encase the whole roll. Now, Jesus doesn't use this analogy, but you can imagine a little bit of sin is like mold, and it grows and gets all over everything and makes everything yucky. Well, here's the background. Jesus has just fed 4,000 families. Now, 6 months previous to this, he had fed 5,000 families, but just maybe a week before this, he had fed 4,000 families with a couple loaves of bread and a couple fish. And furthermore, he had some issues with the Pharisees. He had this discussion, this conflict with the Pharisees. And they had gotten into a boat bound for Bethsaida. And that's where we're going to pick up the story today. Jesus and his disciples are in a boat. Remember, the disciples were fishermen. They had boats on their way to Bethsaida. Mark 8:14. And the disciples had forgotten to take bread. That's something important. You're on a boat, you got to have bread. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. These loaves weren't loaves. They were like, loaves like this. So, one loaf isn't going to go very far with 12 disciples and with Jesus. And the trips typically took quite a ways. They only went 1 or 2 miles an hour. So they were worried about this. See, the disciples were traveling on the boat and had forgotten to take bread. Mark 8:15. And Jesus was giving orders, giving a commandment to them. He's not just giving a suggestion, say, maybe sometime you think he's giving them orders to them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. You see, leaven represents evil and evil influences and false teaching. And leaven represents something, yeast, represents something that spreads through you to corrupt you. So he's saying there's things about the Pharisees, beware of them because they're going to get into you. Don't let them get into you because they get into you. They can spread all through you. There's things about Herod that are evil. Don't let those evil things get into you because they'll spread through you and corrupt you. So who are these guys, the Pharisees? If you've been watching the Bible studies, you're learning a lot about the Pharisees. But let me just review a little bit. The Pharisees were a self-righteous Jewish sect. Sect being, in Jesus' church today, we have Catholics and we have Baptists, and maybe have Presbyterian, all these different kind of sects, because a sect is something that believes the same thing in general, but has some special nuances to it. And these were a sect of the Jewish faith. And they were super religious, super uber religious. And they obeyed what was called the tradition of the elders, which were rules made by men. These weren't God's rules. They were men's rules, and it was an interpretation of God's law. But they interpreted God's law and they wrote it down. It said the tradition of the elders is really what you have to obey. And it was regulations for what they could eat and what they couldn't eat, what they could do on the Sabbath, what they couldn't do on the Sabbath, and so forth, what they were to give, and so forth and so forth. And it expanded upon God's law. And they, the Pharisees, obeyed this tradition rigorously. They spent their whole life worrying about this tradition of the elders. And in fact, they thought that that was where the salvation came, from obeying all the rules of the tradition of the elders. However, they used this tradition of the elders to get around, to circumvent God's rules. For instance, God said you love to neighbor as yourself. They used the tradition of the elders not to show love to people. They used the tradition of the elders not to take care of their parents. They used the tradition of the elders to do all things, all kinds of things that God did not want them to do. So they justified it. And they were proud. These people thought that God was lucky to have them. You ever find somebody like that? Oh, God, you're so lucky to have me. I'm so good. No, I'm lucky to have you, God, because I'm not so good. But they really thought that they were proud. They thought God was lucky to have them. And furthermore, they did their religious practices, their long prayers. So people say, oh, you're so good because you can pray so well. You ever get that feeling? Maybe somebody's doing a prayer so that people say, oh, you're so good. They would do their giving. They'd ring bells. Say, look, I'm giving all this money. Look how good I am. They would fast and they would go, oh, I haven't eaten a whole meal. Oh, I am so religious. I'm so good because I'm not eating. And so forth. They did their practices so that people would praise them. They loved the praise of people. So why then should the disciples beware of the leaven, of the evil practices of the Pharisees? Well, for one thing, the Pharisees refused to believe in Jesus. They had the first 5 books of the Bible memory. They knew all the prophecies. They knew Jesus fulfilled the prophecies. They knew about Jesus' miracles, yet they refused to believe in him. They said, surely if there was a Messiah, he'll come to us first. That was some of their thinking. And since Jesus didn't, they were out to disprove Jesus. They refused. They found ways not to believe in Jesus. Furthermore, they were leading people away from God. Here's a true and trustworthy statement. You're to lead people to God. Do not be found to be a person who leads people away from God. That's a bad thing. You don't want to be leading. You don't want to get in the way of God. It's one thing if you sin yourself, but you don't want to draw people away from God. You don't want to get in the way of people coming to God. And that's what the Pharisees were doing. They looked to take advantage of their position. They loved the chief seats. They loved people calling them, oh, you're so good. They took advantage of their positions. Beware of taking advantage of your position, especially if you have a position for God. Don't take advantage. You see some of the televangelists and so forth take advantage of their positions. Don't do it. Don't do it. They were prideful hypocrites, and we talked about that. Say one thing and do another. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't let that leaven get in you. The leaven of hypocrisies. And they lacked compassion, they lacked mercy, and they lacked love. These are just the things God wants you to have. He wants you to have compassion. He wants you to have mercy. He wants you to have love. And don't let the leaven of not doing those things even take a toehold in you. All right, so who was this guy, Herod? Well, Herod was an important person. Herod was a bad guy, but he was an important person. Picture the Sea of Galilee. Around the north side is the province of Galilee, and around, the north and the east side is the province of Galilee. Along the north side and the west is the province of Berea. And Herod was king, or he was ruler of this big area. All the people that were in there were under his rule. He was a very powerful, but he was a bad guy ruler. He was guilty of sexual sin. By the way, if you want to learn about Herod, read Mark chapter 6. He was guilty of sexual sin. See, this guy Herod liked his brother's wife. His brother had a wife, and apparently she was quite beautiful. Herod seduced her. Furthermore, he convinced her to divorce his brother, and he divorced his own wife, and he married her. Furthermore, she was a relative, and he shouldn't have been interested in her anyway because she was a relative. Furthermore, Herod allowed his stepdaughter, who was a teenager, to dance erotically in front of his dinner guests. And she did a dance that was something like what a prostitute would do. And Herod himself was taken back by this guy. Yeah, this guy Herod was guilty of sexual sin. Furthermore, Herod allowed his wife to influence him to do evil things. Well, what evil things? Well, for one thing, she said, I want you to arrest John the Baptist. He said, I don't want to arrest John the Baptist. She says, arrest John the Baptist. And he listened to her. He did what she wanted and did. And then she said, kill John the Baptist. I want you to kill John the Baptist. And he did what she convinced him to do, and he had John the Baptist executed. See, he was a bad guy. Furthermore, he knew about Jesus' miracles. He was quite aware of the miracles of Jesus. He refused to even consider that Jesus was the Messiah. And furthermore, he was a very, very, very fearful person. He was a guy who was afraid of Jesus. He was afraid of John the Baptist. Yet he had him killed. He was still afraid of him, and he was afraid of his dinner guests. So then, what is it about Herod that the disciples should avoid becoming like? What leaven did Herod have? What evil practices? Well, for one, he let others influence him through it. Don't let peer pressure influence you to do evil things. Furthermore, he found reasons not to believe. Look for reasons to believe, not to believe. Furthermore, his life was driven by fear. Don't let your life be driven. You have to let your life be driven. What's the worst thing? As a Christian, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, you die. And then you go to heaven. You get a resurrected body. You're with Jesus and the Father forever. Don't let your life be driven by fear. Don't be sexually immoral. Don't let your life be driven by sexual immorality. Don't be like Herod. If you have a little bit of power, don't use that power to do evil. Don't use your power to do evil. And for goodness sakes, don't be like Herod. Stand up for what's right. Stand up for what's right. Don't let these things influence you. Don't let even a little bit of these things get in you, because they'll spread like leaven. Mark 8:16. And they, the disciples, began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. See, they thought Jesus talking about leaven, yeast, that has something to do with bread. Maybe Jesus knows we don't have any bread, and they're talking about this fact. And see, the disciples did not understand what Jesus said. They didn't understand he was talking about literally yeast, and don't let the leaven, the yeast of Herod or the Pharisees influence your life. They thought he was speaking about bread, the bread they had forgotten. And here's an interesting question. Have you ever misunderstood Jesus' teaching? Well, I tell you, if you read the Gospel of John, all that theology in the Gospel of John, all Jesus' teaching and all that theology, you're not going to understand all that right off the bat. There's some hard stuff in there. And we all have misunderstood some of the teachings of Jesus. Verse 8:17. And Jesus, aware of this, that they were confusing his teaching with not having brought any bread, aware of this, said to them, the disciples, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet comprehend or understand? Do you still have your heart hardened? So what is Jesus saying? He's saying, I am not talking about bread. I'm talking about yeast. I'm talking about leaven. I'm talking about what I don't want you to do. I'm not talking about bread. I was speaking about leaven. I'm saying don't be like the Pharisees. Don't be like Herod. Use these people as examples of what not to be. So don't let their evil ways even get a toehold in you. Don't let them do it. Verse 18. Jesus continues. He says, having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not understand? What is Jesus saying? He's saying, open your eyes. Open your ears. Listen to me. Remember what I taught you. Remember what I've done. Stop worrying and trust me. Mark 8:19. Jesus says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets of broken pieces did you pick up? They said to him, 12. 6 months previously, he fed 5,000 people with a couple of loaves of fishes, and there was 12 baskets left over, more bread and fish than when they started. And so the disciples remembered. They remember that they had fed 5,000 6 months previously, and that there were 12 baskets of leftovers. And Jesus went on. He said, just last week, when I broke the 7 for 4,000, the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said 12. And the disciples remembered. They remembered it was just a week ago. They weren't going to forget. He had just fed 4,000 families with these 7 loaves, and that there was 7 large baskets of leftovers, which is a lot more than what they had started. So he's telling them. He said, "I'm not talking about leaven. I'm talking about bread." And he was saying to them, "Do you not yet understand?" So what is he saying? He said, I certainly was not talking about bread. He said, I can make all the food you need. Remember, I fed 5,000 6 months ago, 5,000 families, no problem. Fed 4,000 families just last week. Don't worry, we have all the bread we need. I can take that 1 loaf and multiply it. We'll have all we need to eat. He said, I was speaking of the evil nature of the Pharisees and Herod. Look at them. Learn from them what not to be like. Don't let their nature even get a toehold in you. You need to think about what I've said. Now the subject shifts. They arrive at Bethsaida. And verse 8:22. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a man who was blind to Jesus and begged him to touch him. So they brought a man. Friends brought a blind man to Jesus, said, please, please, please heal my friend. And here is a true and trustworthy statement. Friends bring friends to Jesus. Friends don't lead friends away from Jesus. Friends bring friends to Jesus. You have a friend doesn't know Jesus? Bring him to Jesus. How do I do that? They can do a Bible study. Bring him to a worship service. Have him view some of these videos. Introduce him to somebody that knows a lot about Jesus. Tell him why you believe in Jesus. You don't have to know a lot of theology, but friends bring friends to Jesus. You often use this, if you have the cure to cancer, you share the cure to cancer. Well, you have the cure as a Christian to something a lot more important than cancer. Friends lead friends. Friends bring friends to Jesus. Verse 8:23. Taking the man who was blind by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting in his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? So why do you think Jesus brought the man out of the city? Why did he take him out of that village? He wanted to avoid publicity. I think this is one of the key things. Jesus wanted to avoid publicity. He was on a strict timetable. 6 months later, he had to be in Jerusalem on the Passover to be crucified. That was the plan all along. He would be crucified in Jerusalem on the Passover, and he didn't want things moving too fast. He heals this guy out, and everybody sees it. They're all going to try to make him king, and there'll be scores. I mean, many people, thousands and thousands and thousands. And Jesus wanted to slow things down at this point. Furthermore, he probably wanted to deal with this guy individually. He wanted Jesus deals with us individually. Deals with you different than me. He wanted to deal with this guy individually. And maybe he wanted to separate this guy from his friends. Maybe he wanted to see if this guy's faith, he knew the guy's friend's faith was good. He wanted to know what this guy's faith was. He wanted to be with this guy individually. Maybe he wanted to separate him from his friends so that when he healed him, because he knew he was going to heal him, he knew what he was going to do, that his friends wouldn't be going around telling everybody and getting everybody all excited. Now, Why did Jesus put spittle in the man's eyes? You'd say, ah. And in today's society, that would be something that would be creepy, right? Not so in Jesus' society. In Jesus' day, spittle was something that had medicinal value. At least they thought that it did. And it isn't a gross thing that you would think of. If somebody spit on you or put their spit in your eye today, you'd be really upset. And it wasn't so in Jesus' day. So why did he do that? Why would he do that? Well, I think he wanted to let the blind man know he was going to heal his eyes. He said, I'm going to heal your eyes. I'm going to heal him. And the other thing I think that is really of note, Jesus heals different people in different ways. Doesn't do it the same. You look back at all the times when Jesus healed blind people. There's a bunch of different ways that Jesus certainly could have just said, boom, you're healed. And the guy's eyes would have been restored. He certainly had that power. He healed people from afar all the time. And Jesus deals with us individually. And this is a key point. Jesus doesn't deal with you the way he deals with me. He deals with me different than he deals with you. He's got something that he wants me to do different than what he wants you to do. He wants us all to keep the commandments, but he has a different job for every one of us, in addition to keeping the commandments. Mark 8:24. And he, the man, Jesus said, do you see anything? And he, the man, looked up and said, I see people, for I see them like trees walking around. You see, this guy, at this point, was partially healed. Wasn't completely healed at this point. He was seeing and not seeing too good, like somebody who's really, really nearsighted and doesn't have his glasses on. Verse 25. Then again, he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently. The man looked intently and was restored and began seeing everything clearly. See, Jesus healed this man in stages over time. Jesus often will deal with you in stages over time, sometimes over long periods of time. See, often Jesus deals with us in stages over long. For instance, our knowledge of Jesus and his teaching. So you became a Christian. Do you know all Jesus' teaching, everything about him? No. Do you know everything about Jesus right now? Everything that there is to know? No. Nobody does. However, we all know a lot more now than when we were first saved. And a year from now, we know a lot more. And a year after that, we know a lot more. We learn about Jesus in stages over time. And I could talk about that for a long time, but I won't. I'll give you a break. Same kind of thing with our knowledge of the Bible. You know everything about the Bible? No, I know a lot more about the Gospels than I know about a lot of the Old Testament. I know some things about the Old Testament too, because I've taught the Old Testament. Making our hearts like Jesus. Is your heart fully like Jesus? No. But is it more like Jesus than it was 5 years ago? Well, I hope so. More than when you were saved? Yeah, I hope so. You think it's going to be more like Jesus in 5 years? Yeah, I hope so. And that's the goal, making our hearts more and more like Jesus. Driving sin out of life. You don't drive sin out of your life just like that. All of us are sinners. But what we want to do is we want to have less and less and less sin and less grievous sin in our lives all the time. So Jesus deals with us in stages over time. Last verse, Mark 8:26. And he, Jesus, sent him, the man he had just healed, the blind man he had just healed, to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. So why did Jesus send this man home? Well, maybe so the man would tell his wife first. Well, maybe that's what I would want. I'm going to go tell him, don't let Jesus heal me. I got to tell you. But maybe he wanted him to tell his wife first. I don't know. Could be. To avoid all the townspeople knowing. Maybe that's why he separated him from his friends, because if his friends had seen it, everybody would have known. They would have gotten so excited because they loved their friends, and they loved them enough to take him to Jesus anyway. To avoid a lot of publicity, because he was on a strict timetable, and he wanted to avoid the publicity. To give himself time, maybe, to get out of town to the next place. And it was not yet Jesus' time. His time was about 6 months in the future. And like we said, Jesus was on a strict timetable. Well, here's my summary. Don't be like the Pharisees. Don't let the leaven of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were actually evil people, at least at this time. Don't be like the Pharisees. Don't be lovers of self. Jesus wants you to be as lover of your neighbor. Don't be legalistic in your religion. Remember, this is a key point. Your salvation comes by your belief in Jesus. That's how you get saved. You believe in Jesus, and you're sorry for your sins, and you get saved. And then because God has done this wonderful thing for you, you should be doing all these works for Jesus. Jesus wants you to do all these good things. The good things don't get you saved. You have to do those out of your love for Jesus. But what does get you saved is by believing in Jesus and being sorry for your sins. Don't be leading people away from Jesus. What do friends do? Friends bring friends to Jesus. Friends don't keep people from Jesus. Don't keep people from Jesus. Don't lack love. Don't lack compassion. Don't lack mercy. Jesus wants us to be loving people. He gave us really strict commandments about that. Have compassion. Have mercy. That's what he wants us to be. Don't be like Herod. Don't be like that evil person Herod. Don't allow people to influence you for evil. Don't do it. Don't let your peers influence you to do something that's wrong. Don't reject the truth. Don't reject the truth, especially the truth about Jesus. Don't be driven by fear. You don't have to be driven by fear. One of the wonderful things about Christianity is we don't have to be driven by fear. Don't let sexual immorality drive you. Don't use whatever powers you have to do evil. Don't do it. Don't use your powers to do evil. You should use whatever you can to do good. And choose to stand up for the right. Stand up for what's right. Remember, sin is like leaven. It's like yeast. Once it gets in there, it permeates throughout your whole being. Sometimes, a lot of times, Jesus is going to act in stages. He's going to act in stages over time. He healed my friend, Sharon, of cancer. And he did this in stages over time. She had to go through one type of therapy, then another type of therapy. Now she's on a third long-term type of therapy. Sometimes Jesus does things in stages over time. Jesus deals with each one of us individually. Like I said, he's going to deal with you different than he deals with me. Well, if you watch these videos, you know that I want you to pray 3 prayers. There used to be a 4th prayer, but I think the coronavirus is in pretty good control right now. Pretty good control, especially if you're in a facility. Here's 3 prayers. Here's the 3 prayers I want you to pray. Number 1, pray for salvation for everybody around you. If you're in a facility, that means the staff, the aides, the nurses, and so forth, and the residents around you and your family. Be praying for salvation for them. That's a great evangelistic thing you can do. It's an easy thing for you to do from an evangelistic standpoint. I want you to pray against racism. Racism has no place either in Jesus' church or in our country. Pray against racism. God, I pray against racism. Please, please end it in your church. End it in the country. And pray for unity. Pray for unity in Jesus' church. Don't let our church be divided in any way. Pray for unity in the church and unity in our country. This country is still fragmented. We want to pray for unity in our country. Well, with all that said, we got one last thing to say. Say it with me. Aloha. See you there. God bless you all. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.